The sound came from the lower decks of the Astra 9 station, a deep, aching cry that echoed through the metal halls. Most people ignored it. The scientists said it was just noise in the containment area. The dragon creature again. But to Daniel Park, the quiet janitor who cleaned those halls every night, it didn't sound like noise. It sounded like pain. He pushed his cleaning cart along the empty corridor, stopping near the heavy security door marked Containment Lab 3. Through the thick glass window, he saw her, the creature everyone called a Dracarian female. Her scales shimmered like molten gold, but her body was weak, covered in burn marks from the plasma net that had caught her. In the next chamber, a smaller pod glowed faint blue. Inside was her baby, still barely breathing. Daniel stood there for a long time, the mop in his hand forgotten. The mother dragon lifted her head slowly, eyes like burning amber, and for a brief moment, their eyes met. He froze, afraid she might attack, but she didn't. Instead, she pressed her clawed hand against the glass, and a low, rumbling sound filled the air, sad, pleading. "Hey," Daniel whispered. "I can't help you. They won't let me in there." She didn't understand his words, but she tilted her head slightly, as if she could feel the meaning. Behind him, voices echoed from the upper deck. 2 scientists were talking as they walked past. "The specimen is stable," one said coldly. "The infant will expire soon, but we have enough data." The other chuckled. "Shame. The mother's distress levels are fascinating. Make sure the sensors keep recording." Daniel felt anger rise in his chest. Expire. That's what they said instead of die. To them, the dragon and her child were just projects. He looked back at the window. The mother dragon's body trembled as she let out another weak roar, this one quieter, full of pain. Daniel swallowed hard. "Hold on," he whispered. "Just hold on." That night, while the rest of the crew celebrated in the mess hall, Daniel stayed behind. He checked his cleaning schedule. No one would be near the lab for the next 2 hours. His hands shook as he used his maintenance card to override the lower hatch door. He wasn't supposed to have access, but years of fixing broken pipes and vents had taught him a few tricks. Inside, the lab smelled of burnt metal and chemicals. The baby's stasis pod flickered with red warnings. Vital signs critical. Daniel ran to the control panel and tapped the screen. The chamber temperature was dropping. Too cold for the baby to survive. He looked around for something, anything, to fix it. His eyes fell on a heating coil from one of the floor units. He ripped it out, sparks flying, and connected the wires to the pod side ports. The screen blinked, then showed a small rise in temperature. A faint sound came from the pod. The baby dragon's chest moved. Slowly, but it moved. Daniel let out a shaky breath. "Come on, little one. Don't give up now." Behind him, a deep growl filled the air. He turned, heart racing. The mother dragon was watching him through the reinforced glass. She leaned forward, her eyes wide with confusion and hope. When she saw the pod's glow return, she pressed her claw to the glass again, making a low humming sound, soft, almost gentle. Daniel smiled faintly. "Yeah, I think it's working." Suddenly, the security alarms blared. Red lights flashed across the walls. He'd triggered an alert. The door behind him slammed open, and 2 guards rushed in. "Step away from the specimen," one shouted. Daniel raised his hands. "I was just trying to—" "Step back." Before he could finish, a loud crash shook the lab. The mother dragon slammed her tail against the glass wall. It cracked, but didn't break. She roared, not in anger, but in fear. The guards aimed their shock rifles, but Daniel stepped in front of the pod. "Don't shoot. The baby's alive, look." The guards hesitated. Through the glass, they could see the tiny creature moving weakly in the pod. The mother dragon's eyes focused on Daniel, not the guards. She didn't attack again. She just watched him. One of the guards lowered his weapon slightly. "What the hell did you do?" "I fixed the heating," Daniel said. "That's all." She wasn't trying to hurt anyone. She was begging for help. The guards exchanged uneasy looks. The creature that had destroyed 2 armored drones earlier now stood perfectly still, because of a janitor. From the intercom above, the head scientist's voice barked. "Containment breach detected." Guards, report immediately. The alarms continued to blare. Daniel backed away slowly, eyes still locked with the mother's. "I'll come back," he whispered. "I promise." As the guards escorted him out, the mother dragon let out one last sound. Not a roar this time, but a soft rumble, like a breath of gratitude. Daniel didn't know what it meant, but he felt it deep inside his chest. That night, as he sat alone in his quarters, staring at the faint burns on his hands, he could still hear that sound, the cry that no one else cared to hear. He looked out at the stars beyond the glass window. "You're not alone anymore," he said quietly. Far below in the containment lab, the mother dragon lifted her head weakly and stared toward the same stars. For the first time since her capture, her breathing slowed, calm and steady. Her baby's heartbeat grew stronger beside her. And though no one on the station noticed, one quiet human janitor had just changed everything. The next morning, Daniel Park was called to the security office. He sat quietly while two officers watched him through the glass. One of them placed a file on the table, filled with images of the damaged lab. "You were seen inside Containment Lab 3, the officer said. You had no clearance. Do you know what that means?" Daniel nodded. "Yes, sir." "Then why did you do it?" He hesitated. The baby was dying. No one was helping. "I just couldn't ignore it." The officer stared at him. "You risked your life and this station for an experiment. You're a janitor, Park. You clean floors. You don't make decisions about alien creatures." Daniel didn't argue. There was no point. They wouldn't understand. He was suspended from duty for a week. But that didn't stop him from thinking about the mother dragon and her child. That sound, the quiet hum of her voice, stayed in his mind all night. It wasn't just a beast growl. It was something more. Late that night, while everyone slept, Daniel sat by his small bunk and opened the old terminal he'd kept hidden. He typed into the station's maintenance network. He still had access codes from years of work in the lower decks. It took only minutes to reach the lab's temperature control systems. The baby's vitals were stable for now, but the heating unit showed signs of failure again. He frowned. "They're going to let it die," he whispered. He had to do something. But this time, if he was caught again, they'd send him off the station, or worse. He stared at the screen for a long time before muttering, "I can't just watch." That night, Daniel took his maintenance tools and went back to the lower deck. The corridors were quiet, the lights dim. He moved like a shadow, keeping close to the walls. He knew the camera blind spots. Years of cleaning had taught him where to walk unseen. He reached the lab door and tried his key card. Red light. Denied. He sighed, then pried open the control panel beside it. A few sparks later, the lock clicked open. Inside, the lab looked colder than before. The mother dragon, Mara, lay curled around the pod. Her scales had lost their shine, and her breathing was slow. The baby's chamber flickered again. Daniel moved quietly to the control desk and checked the temperature. It was falling fast. "Hang on," he whispered. He took out a small power cell from his toolkit and connected it to the pod's backup system. The lights inside brightened, and a soft sound came from within, the baby's heartbeat. Mara lifted her head. Her golden eyes glowed faintly as she stared at him. This time, she didn't growl or move to attack. She just watched. Daniel raised his hand slowly. "It's okay. I'm helping." Mara made a low sound, not threatening, but cautious. Then she turned her gaze toward her baby. Daniel noticed one of the medical screens, still active. It displayed something like a brain scan, full of strange patterns. He didn't understand the symbols, but one thing stood out, a section marked pain response. Active. He frowned. They're still running pain tests. Before he could react, the intercom clicked. "Unauthorized access detected," a robotic voice said. He froze. No, not now. The door behind him began to unlock. Footsteps echoed in the hallway. Mara's body tensed, wings spreading slightly. Daniel glanced back and whispered, Please don't attack. I'll fix this." He typed quickly on the console, rerouting the alert signal to the maintenance logs. For a few seconds, the alarm stopped. The door opened, and one of the guards from yesterday entered, flashlight in hand. "Who's there?" Daniel ducked behind a counter, holding his breath. The guard walked closer, scanning the area. Mara let out a soft, deep rumble that vibrated the air. The guard froze. Easy, easy there. Daniel knew he had only one choice. He stepped out slowly. It's me, he said. The guard's eyes widened. You again? Are you out of your mind? Please, Daniel said. The pod's failing. The baby will die if... It's not your problem. It is now. Before the guard could respond, the baby inside the pod coughed. A weak, tiny sound, but enough to make both of them stop. The lights inside steadied. The readings climbing. The guard stared. What did you do? I fixed the power, Daniel said quietly. That's all. Just look at her. She's calm now. They both turned to Mara. The massive creature had lowered her wings. Her eyes were on Daniel. Her head bowed slightly, like she understood what he'd done. The guard whispered, She's not attacking. Daniel nodded. She knows. The silence was heavy. The guard finally sighed. You're going to get me fired. Maybe, Daniel said, but she deserves a chance. The guard shook his head. You didn't hear this from me, but the higher-ups plan to move her tomorrow. They're separating them. The baby goes to another facility. Daniel felt his stomach drop. What? They'll never survive apart. Orders are orders. The guard turned toward the door. You should go before anyone else shows up. Daniel stood there for a long moment, watching as Mara rested her claw gently on the baby's pod. Her eyes met his again. He knew what he had to do. It wasn't smart. It wasn't safe. But it was right. He whispered, I'll stop them. I promise. Mara blinked once, slowly, as if she understood. Daniel left the lab quietly, his heart pounding. He didn't know how he'd do it yet, but he knew this much. Tomorrow, when they came to take the baby away, he wouldn't just stand by and watch. For the first time in his life, the janitor was about to break every rule that existed. The alarms began just after midnight. Daniel Park woke up to the sound of sirens and the flashing red light outside his small cabin. The intercom crackled with a voice shouting, Containment breach in Lab Section 3. All security teams report immediately. He didn't need to guess who it was. Mara. He grabbed his tool bag and ran out into the corridor. Smoke filled the air, and the floor vibrated beneath his boots. People ran past him, guards, scientists, engineers, but he went the other way, down toward the lower decks. When he reached the lab hallway, the doors were twisted metal. Sparks flew from broken wires. He stepped inside carefully. The lab was half destroyed, fire licking the walls. The stasis pod lay shattered on the floor, and beside it, the tiny baby dragon whimpered weakly, struggling to breathe. Mara, he called. A low, guttural sound answered him from the corner. The mother dragon was there, her scales blackened with burns, her wings spread wide. She was breathing hard, eyes glowing faintly in the smoke. When she saw him, she didn't roar this time. She just watched, tense and ready to defend her child. Daniel raised his hands. It's okay. I'm here to help. He stepped closer, kneeling beside the baby. The small creature's chest rose unevenly. He looked around, spotting a broken oxygen valve nearby. He tore off his jacket and wrapped the baby in it, then connected a small pipe from his toolkit to feed clean air from the emergency line. The baby gave a soft chirp. Alive. Mara lowered her head slightly, breathing heavily. Then the ceiling shook again as part of the structure collapsed. Flames spread across the far side of the lab. The emergency sprinklers hissed, but the fire kept growing. Daniel looked up and muttered, We have to get out. He turned toward Mara. Can you walk? She tilted her head, understanding the tone if not the words. She moved one leg, limping forward. Her claws scraped against the metal floor. Daniel picked up the baby, holding it close. He motioned toward the exit. Come on, follow me. They moved through the burning corridors, the smoke thick and black. The alarm lights flickered red through the haze. Every few steps, Mara would stop and push away debris with her wings, clearing the path for him. At one junction, a steel beam blocked their way. Daniel tried to move it, but it was too heavy Mara stepped beside him and, with a low growl, melted away with a blast of fire from her throat. The heat rolled over him, but she kept it directed away, careful not to harm him. He looked up at her in awe. "Thanks," he said, coughing. They continued forward until they reached a sealed blast door. The control panel was offline. He tried to power it manually, but the circuits were dead. "No good," he muttered. Behind them, the ceiling gave another groan, and a burst of flame roared down the corridor. Mara stepped in front of him, her wings spreading wide. The fire washed over her scales, but she stood firm. Daniel covered the baby with his body and waited until the heat faded. When he looked up, she was still there, her breathing rough but steady. He realized something then. She wasn't just protecting her baby anymore. She was protecting him, too. He wiped the sweat from his forehead. "You're tougher than anyone here, you know that?" She tilted her head, watching him curiously, her chest rumbling with a soft sound, almost like a purr. He looked at the locked door again. "Okay, we're doing this together." He opened his tool bag and pulled out a plasma cutter. Sparks flew as he worked on the metal. The baby whimpered softly, and Mara lowered her head to comfort it, making a deep humming noise. Daniel worked faster, sweat dripping down his face. After a few minutes, the door gave way. Cold air rushed in from the escape corridor beyond. "Go!" he shouted, waving her forward. Mara moved first, but suddenly part of the ceiling fell. Daniel pushed the baby into her arms. If dragons could hold something, she did, and threw himself against a falling beam. The weight knocked him down, trapping his leg. Pain shot through him. He groaned, tried to move, but the metal wouldn't budge. Mara turned around, her golden eyes flashing. She saw him pinned and roared, a sound that shook the corridor. Then, with a powerful swing of her claws, she tore the metal apart. She reached down carefully, lifting him with one clawed hand. Daniel coughed weakly. "Guess I owe you one." She looked at him and gave a small snort, her warm breath brushing his face. They moved together into the escape hall, flames chasing behind them. At the far end, an emergency elevator waited. Daniel pressed a panel, and the doors slid open. He leaned against the wall, breathing hard. The baby lay safely in Mara's arms, its eyes half open now. As the elevator rose, the shaking of the station faded. He looked up at her and smiled weakly. "You did it. You saved us." She stared down at him for a long moment, then slowly lowered her head until her forehead touched his shoulder. Daniel froze, unsure what to do. Then he smiled and placed his hand gently against her scales. "Yeah, we're a team now." When the elevator reached the upper level, the doors opened to a scene of chaos. Smoke, alarms, and shouting soldiers. But none of that mattered at that moment, because deep in the fire and fear of the station, something impossible had happened. A bond had formed between a human and a dragon, not through force, not through fear, through trust. Smoke filled the upper decks as Daniel Park limped out of the elevator. The baby dragon still wrapped his torn jacket. Behind him, Mara followed slowly, her claws scraping the metal floor. The alarm screamed across the station, and red warning lights flashed through the haze. Security teams were already there, pointing weapons at them. One officer shouted, "Stop right there! Drop the creature." Daniel stepped forward, his face covered in soot. "Don't shoot. The lab's gone. Everything's burning. You can't keep her here." The soldiers hesitated, but their orders were clear. "Stand down, human. The creature is dangerous." Mara growled low, her wings spreading wide. The baby whimpered in Daniel's arms. Sensing the tension, he raised his hands. "Please, just look at her. She's protecting her child, not attacking." But the commander didn't care. "Fire!" Before Daniel could react, blinding light filled the corridor. Energy rounds shot toward them, but none reached. Mara stepped in front of Daniel, her wings folding around him like a shield. The plasma bolts hit her scales, bursting into smoke. When the fire cleared, she was still standing. Daniel stared up at her, heart pounding. "You saved me again." She looked back at him, eyes glowing softly through the smoke. The soldiers reloaded, shouting orders. Daniel knew they wouldn't stop this time. He scanned the corridor and spotted an access door marked Hangar Bay 2. That was their only chance. He pointed toward it. This way. Mara followed as he ran, limping but determined. The air smelled of burning metal. Behind them, alarms continued to blare and footsteps echoed closer. They reached the hangar bay doors, but they were sealed. Daniel ran to the control panel, hands shaking. Come on, come on. The screen blinked red. Manual override required. He pulled out his tools, trying to cut the lock. Sparks flew, and his heart pounded faster. The baby shifted weakly in his arms, its small claws clutching his sleeve. Mara turned back toward the hallway. The soldiers were almost there. Her chest glowed faintly, smoke curling from her mouth. She let out a roar that shook the walls, warning them to stay away. The soldiers fired again. Daniel shouted, "Now, Mara!" She released a burst of fire, melting the metal door's edges. Daniel kicked the panel, and the door slid open halfway. Heat rushed into the hangar as they stepped through. Inside, small escape pods lined the walls. Most were damaged or sealed for officers only. Daniel ran to the nearest one and tried the control pad. It worked. He looked back. "In here! Hurry!" Mara moved closer, but the pod wasn't built for creatures her size. She growled softly, as if understanding the problem. Daniel shook his head. "No, we're all going." She lowered her head, staring at him. He could see the reflection of the burning station in her golden eyes. Another explosion rocked the floor. Metal fragments rained from above. Daniel covered the baby with his body. Mara stepped over them, shielding both with her wings again. When the shaking stopped, she lifted him gently with her claws and pushed him toward the pod. The message was clear. Go. He refused. Not without you. For a moment, they just stared at each other, the small human and the massive dragon. Then Mara looked at her baby, then at him again. She lowered her head, making a deep sound that almost sounded like a plea. Daniel clenched his fists. "You're not staying here." He looked at the pod again, then noticed the emergency cargo compartment behind it, bigger, reinforced. It wasn't designed for passengers, but it could fit her. Maybe. He waved her over. "There. You can fit there." Mara blinked, then followed. She crouched low, squeezing her body through the opening. The metal groaned, but she fit. Daniel climbed in with the baby, shutting the hatch. The console flickered weakly. He hit the launch sequence. The countdown began. 5, 4, 3. The soldiers burst into the hangar, just as the engines roared to life. "Stop that pod!" the commander shouted. But it was too late. The blast from the engines threw them backward as the pod shot out into space. Inside, the small chamber rattled violently. Daniel held the baby close as Mara braced against the walls, her claws digging into the metal. The pressure made his ears ring, but he didn't care. They were free, through the small viewport. The burning space station grew smaller and smaller until it disappeared into the darkness. For the first time in days, there was silence. Daniel leaned back, gasping for breath. "We did it," he whispered. Mara looked down at him, her breathing slow and deep. The baby stirred in his arms, blinking its golden eyes. He smiled weakly. "You're safe now." For a long moment, no one spoke. There were no words that fit this kind of silence. Only the hum of the engines and the soft sound of the baby's breathing. Finally, Daniel looked up at Mara. "I didn't think I'd ever say this, but I'm glad I met you." She blinked slowly, then lowered her head and rested it gently beside him. The warmth from her scales spread across the cold metal floor. He looked out the window again. The stars stretched endlessly ahead, shining brighter than before. They had no idea where they were going, or if anyone would find them, but it didn't matter. They had escaped the cages, the experiments, the cruelty. And somewhere between fear and fire, a janitor and a dragon had done the impossible. Weeks passed since Daniel and Mara escaped the burning station. Their small escape pod drifted to the dark void, carried by weak engines and the last bit of luck they had. Food was almost gone, and the oxygen filters blinked yellow. Still, Daniel never stopped trying to fix the systems, even with scraped hands and tired eyes. The baby dragon had grown a little. It no longer cried softly like before. It chirped and flapped its tiny wings in the small cabin. Daniel smiled every time he saw it move. "You're tougher than me, little one," he whispered, tightening a loose panel. Mara watched him quietly. Her body filled most of the pod's cargo bay, but she had learned to move gently so she wouldn't crush anything. Every time Daniel coughed or stumbled, her tail would twitch in worry. The trust between them had become something more, something deep. One night, as Daniel drifted half asleep, the pod shuddered. The navigation screen blinked with a weak signal. He sat up fast, rubbing his eyes. "What is that?" A transmission flickered through static. He turned up the volume, and a human voice came through. "This is Fleet Patrol Vessel Orion. Unidentified craft respond." His heart jumped. "This is Daniel Park. Human civilian. I need help. We have survivors on board." The signal crackled. "Survivors? You're not alone." He hesitated, looking at Mara. "Yes," he said. "2 of them." The voice replied after a pause. "Coordinates locked. Stand by for retrieval." He turned to Mara and grinned. "We're going home." But Mara didn't look relieved. Her wings twitched, and her eyes stayed focused on the dark window. Something in her instincts told her this wasn't over yet. Hours later, the human ship appeared. A massive cruiser with bright white lights. It extended a docking arm and latched onto the pod. The doors opened, and armed guards rushed in. Daniel raised his hands. "It's okay. She's not dangerous." But the soldiers froze when they saw Mara. Their weapons came up instantly. "What is that thing doing here?" One shouted. "She saved my life." Daniel said, stepping in front of her, "She's intelligent. She's not your enemy." The officer frowned. "Orders are clear. Aliens from Facility Delta are classified threats." Daniel's voice rose. "No, you can't hurt her. You don't understand. She has a child." At that moment, the small baby dragon peeked from behind his shoulder, its golden eyes wide and curious. The crew stared in silence. Even the officer lowered his weapon a little. Mara lowered her head slowly, not in threat, but in peace. Her eyes reflected the human's lights. For a few seconds, the entire docking bay was quiet. Then Daniel said softly, "She trusted me when no one else would. Please trust me now." The officer hesitated, then finally lowered his weapon. "Fine, but command will want answers." They guided them into the ship carefully. Scientists and medics gathered, whispering in shock at the sight of a living dragon. The baby clung to Daniel's arm the whole time, refusing to be separated. In the following days, Daniel told everything. The experiments, the cruelty, how Mara saved him, how they escaped. He showed recordings from the pod's logs. The crew listened in silence. When he finished, one of the senior officers stood up. "We'll send this report to the Galactic Council," she said. "The truth about Facility Delta will come out." But something unexpected happened. When the report reached the council, so did the recording of Mara's final roar in the station, the cry she gave when she thought her baby was dying. It was broadcast to hundreds of systems as part of the investigation. That sound, half sorrow, half love, spread across space. People everywhere heard it. It became known as the echo heard across the stars. For the first time, alien races and humans listened to the same cry of a mother who only wanted to save her child. And at the center of it all was one man, a simple janitor, who refused to ignore that cry. Weeks later, the council voted to end the experiments and shut down all interspecies labs. Mara and her baby were granted safe passage to their homeworld. On the day of departure, Daniel stood on the observation deck, watching the ship that would carry them home. The baby chirped happily as Mara looked at him one last time. He smiled, trying to keep his voice steady. "You don't need me anymore." Mara blinked slowly, lowering her head until her forehead touched his chest. For a moment, he felt her warmth, her breath, the faint rumble in her chest. Then she stepped back. The doors closed and the ship's engines flared. It rose quietly, gliding into stars. Daniel watched until it vanished. He whispered, "Take care of her, Mama Dragon." When he turned around, the officers behind him were silent. One finally said, You changed everything, Park. He shook his head. No, she did. Months later, people across the colonies would still talk about the human who answered the cry. Songs were written, stories told, statues built, not to honor power or war, but a moment of compassion. And somewhere out there on a distant world, a dragon lifted her head toward the stars and let out a soft, gentle roar. The sound echoed through the night sky, a reminder of what can happen when one human decides to care. The Yendi, Part 5.